But Junior, you know when I make it big in the elevator game, I made air-conditioned hard-tie residents. Me, 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 me. December 8th, 2019. December 8th, 2019, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, a day that will live in infamy. The world was suddenly and deliberately attacked by an invisible enemy. And at least according to the World Health Organization study, the global study, based upon a robust examination of medical records in China dating back to September 2019, that was the date of the first onset of infection from a novel coronavirus that apparently had emerged in a double zoonotic evolution, according to Scripps Research Center scientist Dr. Christian G. Anderson and his buddy Mark Warbley. This was alleged to have occurred at the Hunan Wholesale Seafood Market in Wuhan, and only coincidentally near the location of the Wuhan Virology Institute, just 15 miles away from this venue that is a tenant to over 1,000 vendors with over 400 stalls on 50,000 square meters or 12 acres, the size of 9 American football fields to get a visual, where vendors sold mammals including Asian raccoon dogs, hot badgers, and red foxes, as well as some exotic game and other wild animal fare. In a city 11 million people strong, and that found by January 14th, 2020, only a total of 41 known cases. Rather small from that large number. Only 41 known cases in China, with only 27 having a connection to the wet market, which in a venue the size of 9 American football fields would work out to about 3 cases per football field, with no death reported in China until January 10th. Only signs of pneumonia. A pneumonia described as a pneumonia of unknown etiology. Why this pneumonia seemed different with no fatalities very, very early, one can only speculate. But that is the big picture with which most should be generally familiar. But consider also that in what is the 7th largest city in China, the largest in the central mainland, the Detroit of China, the 42nd largest city in the world, where coincidentally the farmers, the political opposition, found highest incidence of infection, according to the WHO Joint Mission study that had been completed by February 24th. Imagine for a second what would have happened, what would have been the socio-economic effect on the political opposition farming community when the Beijing government decided to clamp down against the virus expressly by shutting down the wet markets across the entire nation. Even though this would have been the very first pandemic connected to this particular wet market since its opening on Juneteenth, 2002. June 19th, 2002. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and about 3 decades ago, I had served as the operations officer for all U.S. Army Strategic Counterintelligence in the continental United States, or CONUS, where I had the unique opportunity to help stand up what was essentially the NORAD capability for biological warfare, which served as a precursor for the organization that George Stephanopoulos had reported on Good Morning America in April of 2020, was supposed to have alerted the former president about an emerging public health crisis, at least by November 2019, which at least conflicts with the findings of the World Health Organization global study, which had examined influenza-like illness, or ILI, and acute respiratory illness, or ARI data, all the way back to the prior September. The raw data. The raw data, not metadata analysis, but the raw data, and then inferring up from there. And it found no empirical evidence of any infections in China until early December. So there is already something not quite verifiable from this ABC News report from George Stephanopoulos. And since Good Morning America says the intelligence was derived from covert communications intercepts, critical thinking, one could reasonably assume that a zoonotic source was not sending out messages over telephone, telegraph, or email before it had arrived. But as Rochelle Walensky says, this virus isn't stupid. So for the next few minutes, having followed this public health crisis from the very beginning and carried it through a half dozen litigations that have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, rather than engaging in news analysis, thinking up theories in what we imagine infectious disease to look like, we can look at this problem and work this problem through what we would be described as intelligence analysis, like one would in strategic counterintelligence, doing the job that I used to do. Just the facts, nothing but the facts. When you make history in strategic counterintelligence by being the first anything, you are probably not going to get a big story in the news. It's like a science. That's why they call it secret stuff. But as just a lieutenant, I was holding down a job of a senior captain. Most junior commissioned officers who have ever served in that role, and the last thing that I wanted to be is the dumb lieutenant who woke up the president over something stupid. And probably the second worst nightmare was to wake up the president and not have a ready solution. You don't get cool points with the president by reporting problems without an answer. Career limiting move. And so let's just say that you are me now, 3 decades ago. What is the best way to be ready to fight tonight, wheels up and ready to roll, when suddenly you receive the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic news about an emerging public health crisis and have to decide what is going on to tell the president? Is it a zoonotic evolution, or is it a biological attack? What do we need to do? Like yesterday, you have 5 seconds and 3 are gone, and you already know the situation report. Well, fortunately, by no matter how you received your commission, OCS, ROTC, the Service Academy, you've probably been indoctrinated with the military warfighter ethos. And you know your von Clausewitz, war is an extension of policy by other means. And you know your Sun Tzu, all warfare is based upon deception. You know your basic stuff. The only 2 types of soldiers on the battlefield, the quick and the dead. But when the balloon goes up, you don't want to be that dumb lieutenant who sounds the war alarm to go to the nuclear option because Patrick Dempsey got infected by a cute little monkey when he was on vacation. So you're going to need to just do a little bit more. And may have to spend some long nights cracking some of those books, learning the science that you forgot or never learned in high school and college. And if you find yourself in a pandemic after 2 years and haven't done that, maybe you have a little reading to do. Now, maybe in other fields of endeavor, maybe even in the vertical transportation business, other professions and other jobs, you may enjoy the luxury of being able to fake it until you make it. But in the military, as a leader, you don't want to be the guy who is always waking up surprised. You'll find yourself in the boardroom very, very quickly. Very, very quickly, like gravity. And when military leaders make mistakes, people die. Even Dr. Fauci, who admits that this virus has fooled us before, woke up surprised and found himself infected. When we look up at the big board with all the stages and phases and plans that everybody kind of voted for, which makes it everybody's problem. We are looking now at over 1 million American fatalities because something wasn't looked at. And almost 97 million people have been infected, over 1 million who cannot return to work because of long COVID that scientists are still trying to figure out. Businesses and churches that were closed, and years of development and education that kids will never get back, the effects of which we're going to be feeling for the next generations. Because you are not chair, and you can't turn back time. You're not Superman, gonna fly fast around the world a whole bunch of times and make a turn back so you can save Lois Lane. That time is gone. Opportunity cost. You don't want to be the guy cheering with the folks at Cape Canaveral out there saying, "Hey, we did it! Hooray, hooray, hooray! USA, USA!" And then think to yourself, "Oops, I forgot to check the O-rings." You want to be that Gene Kranz at Mission Control for whom failure was not an option, who had never lost an American in space and didn't plan to start that day. When Commander Lovell got on the horn and said, "Houston, we have a problem," Gene Kranz told his folks to do what? Work the problem, gentlemen. Work the problem. Where did he begin? Got himself a list of everything on that spacecraft that still worked. And crisis management is just as easy as that. Stick to what you know and not what you think. And definitely not what you think you know. So, LT, you received the warning order on December 31st, 2019. And what do you know? What do you know at that point? You know you have a virus that is making a whole lot of noise. Maybe a little bit too much noise for what would only be 41 cases of a new type of pneumonia by mid-January. And you know that you have a cause in a virus, specifically a coronavirus. Only the 7th coronavirus ever to present a problem to mankind. So you might want to ask yourself, how often does this occur? You only got 7. How many coronaviruses are there in the world? You may remember that SARS was a coronavirus. You may remember MERS was a coronavirus. But you may need to do a little more homework to know that there are over 3,000 coronaviruses that infect mammals. And over 3,000 coronaviruses that infect birds. So when on January 24th, 2020, when you pop on CNN, they are talking about a possible snake origin, possibly Chinese crate or king cobra, you should be saying, "Gentlemen, we need to go back to the drawing board because coronaviruses don't infect snakes. They don't infect reptiles." By February, we should be sitting there saying they do not have an Ophidian codon usage bias when Wei Ji did his scientific report, but nobody did that, not even Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN. Houston, we had a problem. But your problem began way before that, because if you recall from grammar school, some teacher had to tell you that viruses and their virioli are the most abundant biological particles in the world. He said it like a Bible verse. Probably used it like a Bible verse, which should be like looking up at the stars in space for multiple probabilities of other intelligent life, Mr. Spock, E.T., and the Klingons. That whole "we are not alone" idea. But if you decide to check the facts, put on your science hat, did a little accounting, you'd quickly discover that before the novel coronavirus that has now 2 brand new emerging and more transmissible and potentially immune evasive strains beginning to dominate In addition to the one apparently being made at the prestigious University of Boston University, there are only 219 viruses harmful to mankind. If you did a little more homework, you'd probably know that when it comes to a highly contagious disease, they tend to be pretty rare. We don't have a lot of highly contagious diseases for whatever reason. Only a handful. So this novel coronavirus should be starting to look like that. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things that doesn't belong. One of these things is not like the other. Before I finish this pandemic, can you tell me what it is on Sesame Street? But you didn't do that. And now, you got a whole bunch of people dead, LT. You have over 1 million fatalities riding a pandemic by the seat of your pants. And the equivalent of 9/11 every week. Hero. Just last month, Dr. Rochelle Walensky was putting out press releases about shaking things up at CDC, pointing her fingers to blame the other guys before her. But she didn't step up to identify those basic things that especially doctors should have known. But the blame line doesn't stop there, because even you didn't do the problem homework. Everybody was talking a whole lot about going out and doing their duty. Well, hero is what duty is. You gotta do the homework. Gotta take action. Gotta take responsibility. Gotta act like a leader, act like an adult. Put on your big girl pants. Now, nobody knew until some emails produced in a FOIA request that even Christian Anderson and his colleagues had some serious doubts about his zoonotic evolution back in January 2020. But by March, he was out producing the zoonotic evolution theory report from Scripps Research Center that everybody seemed to agree with. By June 2020, Scripps Research Center was claiming that the virus had evolved more spike proteins, like it had married a chia pet, facilitated its acquisition of a human respiratory tract cell. A rapid development that had occurred without any announcement of any new strains or subvariants, the one that had occurred a little way too fast for a natural evolution. And nobody even at Scripps, sponsors of the National Spelling Bee, popped off a red flare or sent out an SOS or got on their walkie-talkie or whatever you do to the world to let people know we need to go back to the drawing board and figure this thing out. By late February 2020, the WHO had dispatched 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists to examine 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases in China. And you should know that, 2 years into a pandemic. That's 19 times more cases examined than had yet been reported in the entire United States, as many as we have doctors, one for each doctor. And what they had found was about 80% of those infected had experienced nothing worse than a mild pneumonia. About 2.4% of those who had been infected were kids, only 2.4%. And there was not even one case that looked like a child had passed the disease to an adult. They found absolutely no outbreaks associated with large social gatherings at a time when China was already reopening schools and its economy. By September 2020, they would say that they had totally resolved the pandemic for themselves. And then it came back. And the World Health Organization back in February 2020 found a consistent pattern of outbreaks that had presented no wider community spread, a significant clinical finding for somebody looking for an emerging virus that's spreading around. A similar finding that has appeared in many large sample size trace contact studies, which were not done in quite the abundance that even scientists say should have been done. A standard disease prevention and mitigation strategy that everyone just decided to blow off with those trace contacts. And not even Dr. Fauci was prioritizing trace contact follow-ups. You have to ask yourself why, especially since by the time that Delta variant that had emerged in India in October 2020 but did not migrate until around April 2021, a long time to be sitting around in India, despite being what Dr. Walensky had described as the most contagious disease that she had ever seen, up there with measles and chickenpox. Up at Cornell University, at that time, the Delta variant was coming over the United States, even the folks in Ithaca, the town outside the university, were noticing something was not quite right. Put inside the newspaper, the only outbreaks of infection that had been occurring were occurring on the campus of Cornell University. And the professors and administrators at that time did absolutely nothing, entirely ignoring the problem that was appearing in their own local newspapers. And you have to ask why. They would not even officially acknowledge the problem until they had completed the fall term and decided to publish a scientific report. Instead, did not do anything to resolve that problem, other than write a report, put something on paper to make it look like they did something, as if the problem would just go away. But they only did what everyone else had done before them, hoping the problem would resolve itself, even though most people know that hope is not a plan. Apparently, quite a few people turn to prayer in pandemic, and that's how people wake up surprised, failure to do their duty. If it is to be, it is up to me. Let there be peace on earth. Let it begin with me. You're grown with responsibilities, obligations, consequences, and repercussions that follow. What? Were you just waiting and praying for the vaccines to be your savior and return you to the promised land? Life doesn't work quite that way, and everybody lost something in this pandemic. And now you know why. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's what you can do for yourself. You can't blame anyone else but yourself, waiting on the other guy to do what you're supposed to do. Now in August 2021, General Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, with decades of experience as a military officer, put out a memo looking authoritative and in charge, and told lottie-dottie everybody to get the shot. And before him, Lieutenant General Jody Daniels in the Army Reserve had the Public Affairs Office take her picture, getting the very first shots, telling soldiers that not getting the shot was like playing Russian roulette with the virus. Just like Ralph Northam, a former Army surgeon, was telling folks after he left office that you need to get the shot, even if you are young, because you don't want to suffer the possibility of being one of the between 7 and 23 million Americans suffering from the enduring effects of long COVID. And that's making decisions based on feelings and fear, which you never want to do, especially as a leader in the military. But at least in the Army, where when leaders make mistakes, people die, we have a process called the composite risk management process for safety management, which is the military decision-making process just refined into a safety program, where you begin by identifying the facts to develop a clear and quantifiable threat picture, to define success in quantifiable terms and enable yourself to develop a reasonably calculated solution based upon those facts, not hopes, not prayers, not dreams. And that empirically was not done. And you ended up with lockdowns that didn't prevent mortality, facial coverings that didn't mitigate the spread, and vaccines that suffered breakthrough infections. And that's exactly what you failed to do. And it's not the way it's supposed to work. You need to know what right looks like. By the second anniversary of the pandemic, you had folks planting flags on the National Mall, which may have been efficacious to remember the irreplaceable souls that had been lost. By the first anniversary, when you were hoping for an end with the vaccines, there were already 527,000 Americans who were not quite as lucky and had died, which the President had said were more American fatalities than both world wars, the conflict in Southeast Asia and 9/11 combined. You can't blame that on anybody else, because you also have a responsibility in a democratic republic. Well, at least according to the latest science report and promoted in the Atlantic magazine, the Omicron variant has only a secondary attack rate of 42.1%. And as they had explained in Sesame Street simplicity language, you actually have a better chance of winning a coin toss than catching the Omicron variant, the most transmissible variant yet, from your cohabitating spouse, significant other, or roommate. But what they did not tell you was that in order to be described as a highly contagious disease, the secondary attack rate has to be at least 60% like smallpox. And if it is not at least 60%, science has known since at least the 1980s that you cannot have a super spreader event. No prior variant of COVID-19 has ever attained that threshold of 60%. So you have to ask yourself why you were told that super spreader events had occurred and why you didn't do the homework to find out. Why? The original variant only had a secondary attack rate of less than 5%. Or not is not a rate. And even the CDC has said that before evolving the science of a pandemic. It's 12 times too low to set off a super spreader event, 4 times too low to be described as a disease being transmitted from person to person. And in that 40-page report published by the WHO in February 2020, even its author thought that nobody had read. They stated in plain English. It is not clear whether this correlates with the presence of an infectious virus. Pandemic and a coronavirus took your time and a whole lot more. But LT, hero, did you take the time to read the report, do the homework? It only takes a total of 60 solemn seconds to be administered the oath of office, but it only takes a second to break it in indiscretion. It only takes a few minutes to do your duty to cast a vote, but it takes a whole lot more time to be informed when you vote, and you have a duty to do that as well. And that's why we don't let children vote at the checkout line in the grocery store. But you are grown, and you look like an intelligent person, hero. Who? This briefing is unclassified, as you were. Carry on. Honest.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.